Hey BookTube. So in the last video I got carried away with talking about all the non-fiction books I wanted to read in 2026 as a potential TBR, not as a guarantee that I'm going to be reading all of these books, because that just won't happen. Probably I'd be very happy if I read half of the books that I talked about, but I got carried away. I talked about all kinds of different books, but I didn't have time to talk about fiction, so I'm dedicating this video to a potential fiction TBR for 2026. And there's going to be some recurring names on here, names that I mentioned last year at the beginning of the year as books I wanted to read in 2025, and then I didn't end up reading because my fiction reading take me out through all different kinds of different paths, and so never ended up getting to them. I'm going to start off with the one book that I'm going to be reading immediately, just so that I can say I checked off at least one book on this list, and it's a reread of Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, and this is the Norton Critical Edition. And what I want to do, like, I've read this book twice already, and that was for school, for university class, and I haven't read it since, but I've always considered it one of my top 10 favorite books of all time, mainly because of how enthrallingly written it is, and the story is just one heck of a story, even if, as most people seem to do when they read this book, how frustrated they are with the first-person narration of our character, Dr. Frankenstein, who's a bit of a self-pitying jerk, so... But regardless, I have very fond memories reading this, so I'm looking forward to reading it again, which I'll be reading it, I'll be starting it right away. But the one thing I want to do, specifically because this is a Norton Critical Edition, is I want to read this from front to back. So the actual book itself is only about 160 some pages, 161 pages. So right here, this is the introduction, or right here where my bookmark is. This is the actual novel printed in this volume. The rest here is all extras. It's contexts and criticism, all based on this novel that has generated so much discussion since the 200 years that it's been published. And I want to read it all. I want to read this from front to back. So I want to read the novel, and I want to read all the context and criticism. That's my goal, because I have I have a whole shelf of Norton Criticals, and I've never read a single one from front to back like that. And I think it would be fun to do that with a book that I consider one of my favorites of all time. So all the different discussions and context, I think, will be a unique experience that I want to try for this year. So that is a guarantee read. I'll definitely be reading that one. Where do I want to go next? Let's start here. I have this edition of Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca, and this is a book that's been sitting on the periphery of my TBR for a long time. I wouldn't say it's directly on my it had been directly on my TBR, because I've never actually held this up to say I'm gonna maybe read it as like one of two options and then left it be. It's more that it's just been sitting there staring at me, and I just ignore it every time, yet I look at it as a book that I want to go back to, or I want to actually get to, not go back to. But the reason is because a lot of people who love Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte say that this book is very much a similar type of book. This novel was published in the 30s, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, 1938. And I love Jane Eyre. It's probably my favorite book of all time. And so it seems natural that I should read this book if it's considered so similar. All I know is that it's a very gothic book, and you know, it's sort of a love story, which you could say the same thing about Jane Eyre, is that it's sort of a love story. But I don't know entirely what to expect, but I think I should get to this year. I should. Whether or not I do is another question, but it's definitely on the priority list. So it's officially on some kind of TBR for this year. Um, then I want to go to a couple of shorter works, I guess you could say. And so last year I read one book of science fiction, I believe, and that was Star Tide Rising by David Brin, and I loved it. I think it was fantastic. And another book, science fiction book that people swear by, and that I'm very interested in or very intrigued by is this book by Douglas Adams, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and it's a very short book, slim mass market paperback, and it's got huge font and it's like 200 pages. So this is a book that I could read fairly quickly, even with my slower reading speed. And I hear that's just a very funny book, and if I end up liking this book, there's other books in an extended series. So this is definitely a high option for 2026 to read if I want to dip my toe back into science fiction, which I do, because I really did enjoy that David Brin novel so much that I would like to keep my science fiction momentum going for the year. And another book that is sort of science fiction, sort of, but it's a book I've read before. This would be a reread, and it's A Voyage to Arcturus by David Lindsay. And the reason why I want to go back to this book is because I've read it before, and when I read it, I wasn't expecting much of it. I was actually trying to improve my reading speed at the time, where I was trying to read with my eyes and not with my inner sub-vocalization. And so I picked novels and a couple of fiction or non-fiction works that I wasn't all that high on, books I didn't think I would end up enjoying that much. And I chose this novel as one of those novels, and I had just an e-copy, and once I started reading it, I could see just how intelligent it was, and just how it's absolutely insane type of novel. On the surface, nothing seems to make sense, and yet I could sense that there is a deeper authorial motivation around the whole thing, that if you give it the time of day, that there's more to be discovered in this book. And so it tremendously impressed me that first time, and I want to read it again and see what I think now, especially since I went out of my way to buy this beautiful Penguin edition, where it's actually a Penguin Classic Science Fiction line. It says Penguin Classic Science Fiction, and they all have white covers with this sketch there, and then they have the purple lettering, the purple spine. I don't know if they publish more of these, but they publish early science fiction works like this in this line, and so I want to go back and read it and see what I think of it, especially since this has influenced authors like C.S. Lewis, who think this is a tremendous novel. So I'm very much interested in going back to that. Another book is a book that would never have been on my TBR for this list if it weren't for BookTube, and it's The Birthday Boys by Beryl Bainbridge. And the reason why this is on my TBR, it's a novel because it's a novel of Captain Scott and his attempt to reach the South Pole in 1912. And it's a very slim book, but it's just an account of that journey, and I believe the journey was a failed journey because they ended up dying. But it's because of Sailing Through Books, who's here on BookTube, and she loves Arctic voyages and these kinds of stories, tremendous expedition stories where people go on insane expeditions that are almost guaranteed to be doomed or to be tragic, and she just loves the accounts of the courage of these people. And I have this book on my list, or I have the physical, this book of this story, and I think it would be kind of cool to see what's up, see if maybe I'd be interested in those kinds of stories too, albeit through a fictional narrative. She likes to read the non-fiction accounts. So those are some novels that I'm considering. Now we come to, I guess, another section of my fiction reading for this year. I don't know if you can hear me when I turn my head like that, but I want to read. I like reading chunky books, and so I have four chunky books that are right up there in contention to be the 1,000-page novel that I read this year, because I'm going to be reading at least 1,000-page novel, or at least one thick, chunky novel. Not all of these are 1,000 pages, but some of them might as well be, based on how difficult they are. And so I have 4 examples of those here. The first one here is The Count of Monte Cristo, which I think has been on my TBR to be read every single year for the past 4 years, and I think that's ridiculous. So this novel I should read this year. In fact, I was actually thinking of reading this in January, but that's not going to happen, so I might actually start this in February if I go that route. And I really should. This is, 1,300 pages, and it's been sitting on my TBR. And I've watched, I used to take a lot of photos of my expanding library. So first I only had the 1 bookshelf in my room, and then I expanded to 2 and 3, and then I have all kinds of bookshelves in there now. And I've seen, and I like to collect all my Penguin Classics that are really thick and put them side by side, and I have the photos of all those Penguin Classics and how I've read basically all of them, those thick Penguin Classics of Victorian era novels, and this is the one that doesn't end up getting read. Like, I've read Don Quixote, I've read the Brothers Karamazov, I've read Anna Karenina, but this one just keeps on getting neglected, no matter how terrific people who don't normally like novels this big, how terrific people say it is. So I want to join in on that fun, and I might as well do it this year. But we'll see, because I have 3 other novels that are contending for that spot. And the next 2 are actually more contemporary works of fiction. This one is 7 Types of Ambiguity by Elliot Perlman, and it's a novel that I've been wanting to read ever since I saw it on one of Steve Donahue's end-of-the-year best fiction lists. I believe it was the end. We'll see what year it was. 2003. So that would have been the Donahue Interregnum. This novel is on that list, and the description that Steve gives of it, and then the description that I get from this book, both highly interest me. Though I cannot actually give you a description because it's got all blurbs on the back. All it says here is that an epic novel about obsessive love in an age of obsessive materialism. So, I was very happy to find this used last year when it had been on my list to get for a long time. And this book clocks in at just under 600 pages. So, a chunkier book. Chunkier novel. But another chunkier contemporary novel that I could read is Harold Brodkey's The Runaway Soul. And again, I was very lucky to find this used last year. And this is published in 1993. Am I correct? 1991. So I was off by a few years, but 1991. And it's like 700 and some pages. No, it's more than that. It's 835 pages. So it is a heftier thing. But I loved the writing style when I sampled this. I read like the first few pages, and I just loved that writing style. And I think I would be very interested to give this one a try in 2026, if I do end up getting around to it. And then the absolute insane pick for this year, if I do end up doing it, would be to read Thomas Pynchon's A Gravity's Rainbow. And part of the reason is because it's been sitting on my TBR, or on my shelves for so long, and it's starting to get sunburnt, or sun bleached. And I don't really like that all that much, because this used to be a vibrant red. Actually, let me give you an example of Where is my other? I'm trying to look for that. I can't find. Oh, here it is. I showed in my previous video T.E. Lawrence's Seven Pillars of Wisdom, again in one of those vintage red spine copies. If you look, there's quite the difference here in color quality at this point. But yeah, this is absolutely insane, because Pynchon is very much an insane writer, but also I hear very talented. So I figured why not try to experience this. I like to do one insane reading project every year. Last year's insane reading project was The Tale of Genji, just reading 1,300 pages in a single month of very small print, of a completely dead culture from, Japanese culture, medieval Japanese culture, like a whole novel based on that with almost no plot line. Seemed insane, and I like doing the insane every once in a while in my reading life. I think this might be this year's insane reading project, but we'll see. What I would like to do is at least give this 100 pages, and if I'm just not agreeing with it, if I'm just not in the headspace to slog through 800 pages of that, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to freely DNF this and give it a go some other time. So we'll see. The one thing that does concern me about this book is that how much of this book is culturally, culturally relevant of the time period. So I think this book came out in the 70s, and it seems like so much of this book, from what I hear of other people, 1973, is that this book is very much of its time, and yet it's good enough and provocative enough that it has transcended the 70s, but it could also be seen as like a portrayal or a portrait of the 70s in like a wacky psychedelic type of mindset, which is again appropriate for the 70s. So I don't know what to expect with this, other than one, it's difficult to read, and two, there's this particular scene, I think Steve says that's like 200 pages in, that is completely revolting, and that he believes Thomas Pynchon put it in there as like a way to see whether or not you have the the stamina or the guts to continue after that completely revolting scene. So a scene that's supposed to gross you out so much that you don't want to continue reading, and that if you do, maybe you're rewarded for it. I don't know what the whole point of that is, but all I know is that it's like a test on the readership of this book. So I don't know. I want to give it a try at some point, and why not now? So that's my understanding of that. Then we move on to a few contemporary books that I've wanted, again, to read last year, but I never got to reading them. The first two are historical fiction. I wanted to do more historical fiction reading, which I don't think I read any historical fiction last year, and I've got a lot of it, and I think I would really like it if I just dove into it. And so what better way to dive into historical fiction than with Mary Renault? I got The Prey Singer, and then I got The Last of the Wine here. So I want to read one or both of these, specifically if I'm going to continue with reading my Western Canon reading list, where I'm still entrenched in Greek history and primary sources, at least translated primary sources. So this book here is from the perspective of an Ionian singer who sings Homer for a living. So he goes around the ancient Greek world singing the poems of Homer and what that world is actually like. And then this book here is the story of two male lovers in ancient or classical Athens, in that specifically put in that time period during the Peloponnesian War. So those are two historical fiction books that I would very much like to get to. At least one of them. Like I gotta read at least one of them. And then here's another book, an American classic novel that I've been wanting to read for so long already, but again, I don't get to it. My reading time is I can only read so much in a year, and the the book is a Look Homeward Angel by Thomas Wolfe, and I love this edition. Like I love this um, Penguin Modern Classic edition with that light blue spine and kind of the weird sort of painting here, and I love just the feel of the book. I love the way the book opens and folds, and I like the font. So and even like the smell of the book. So there's no reason why I shouldn't get to this year. And so I want to read this year. And I've wanting to read it last year, and I wanted to read the year before, which is again a common theme with my TBR is that I find other shiny toys to read throughout the year, and I end up neglecting the ones that sit on my TBR for a long time, like this. Lastly, I have a couple more options for novels to read in 2026. I haven't been reading a lot of Victorian works, at least not English Victorian works. And I don't think I read any last year. I read the only English Victorian novel would be I read Nathaniel Hawthorne's A Wonder Book, which is his short story collection, or his first short story collection retelling tales of ancient mythology, and he's American, so he's not English in the specific sense of Victorian. So the one work that I'm considering for this year, at least in physical form, I might read Trollope on my e-reader this year. I might, depending on how things go. But I want to read The Mill on the Floss by George Eliot, and I've not read any George Eliot before. But for some reason, I don't want to read her masterpiece first. I don't want to read Middlemarch first. I want to read something else by her, and then dive in maybe to Middlemarch at some later period. But I also hear that her most famous short work, which is Silas Marner, is maybe not the greatest introduction to her writing and style. So maybe this will be a good introduction. And this book is a longer book. It's almost 500 pages, and it's in one of these very small print Wordsworth Classic editions. So this one even can be considered a hefty sized book, if maybe not quite a chunkster, but a hefty sized book. And then lastly, I have 3 more books to show you. I'm going to read one of them. For sure. I'm determined to read one of them. That's because I've noticed that I have been collecting these Penguin mass markets in this very particular design, where it's Penguin mass markets with the full-on black, and then you either got the full illustration on the entire cover, or you got the kind where it's got an illustration, and then you got the black stuff up top here with the title and the author. And I've noticed that I don't think I've read a single one of my copies of these, because I've collected many in the past 2 years or 3 years, but I haven't been reading them, and mostly because a lot of them are from different periods of time. So I've got like Molière and some certain medieval works, some certain plays, or I've got a lot of Russian classics that I've read in other translations, or I've got short story collections in these volumes. So I've not been eager to get to them until I'm either in that particular headspace where I can read a medieval classic work, or if I want to read some French playwright. So instead, I figured that I'm going to read at least one of these mass markets, and if I'm going to do that, it has to be one of these 3 French novels, because I don't really have much else. I can either reread, I don't know, Anna Karenina, or the Brothers Karamazov, which I have in these volumes, even War and Peace, which I have not read in any version I could read. But I wanted to read some more French literature. Last year I read Notre Dame de Paris by Victor Hugo, and I really really liked it. So I want to branch out on my French reading. Beyond that, so I have Zola's Therese Raquin, Zola's Therese Raquin, which is one of probably his most famous novel. He's got a huge amount of um, um, novels that Oxford translates. I think most of them, if not all. I haven't really been all that interested in collecting a lot of those, though I've seen people that have, and I have maybe 2 or 3 other of Zola's novels, but I believe this would be a good introduction to Zola, mostly because he's very much, from what I understand, very much a realist type author, so he's depicting, like, naturalism is what it's called, very much the grim, everyday world of people living in a city or whatever, living in poverty or living in scandal, that kind of thing. So this will be my introduction to Zola if I read that this year. Or I could go to Balzac, which I've never read before. I've never read any of his novels, and this is Lost Illusions. I have 2 other novels by Balzac, but I've not read any of them. This is Lost Illusions, translated by Herbert J. Hunt. I should say this Zola here is translated by Leonard Tancock. But yeah, this is, I mean, part of his Balzac's human comedy series, where basically every novel that he wrote and short story is part of this elaborate social setting of the comedy of, I guess, wide human experience in his particular period of time. And so this would be the Balzac that I would read. It's a chunkier thing. It's slots in at 681 pages in this volume here. So this would again be a little bit of a chunkier read. And then the last book here is Flaubert's Sentimental Education. And I've been a little bit hesitant to read some Flaubert ever since I read Madame Bovary, probably about 5 or 6 years ago, when I was first getting into classic literature, like really getting into, I mean, I guess in the general sense of classic literature, like Victorian era, and further back. This is translated by Robert Baldick, and I've been hesitant because I didn't actually enjoy Madame Bovary. I read the Signet Classic translation, and I didn't like the translation. I could notice even then that translation was particularly bad. But what made it worse is that Signet Classic translation, and you would know it if you saw it. It's got like a purple spine. It's got I don't know. It's got the face of a young woman on the cover. Not quite like this, but I think this is a man on this cover. But in that Signet Classic translation, it has a preface by a feminist activist, and basically she spends that entire preface trashing Flaubert and trashing the novel. Like, and I don't understand why that ever got printed, because it totally threw me off. And when I started actually reading the book, I think it just soured part of the taste, that and the creaky translation. So, because everyone says how beautifully it was written, and I could tell that the translator was trying to make it beautifully written, but failing. And that was me at like 19, so 19, 20. So if I go back to Flaubert, it'll be this one, not in the least because the back here says that this novel might be considered the greatest French novel of the 19th century, which I don't know if is true, but it's what is being claimed at the back here. It says, some people consider this a more mature work than Madame Bovary, so they might consider this an even better novel and maybe the best French novel, which I highly doubt. I mean, you got Hugo, you got Alexandre Dumas, you got all kinds of French people to contend with, French novelists to contend with, but I don't know. We'll see. Maybe I will agree. And that's it. so that's it. Those are potential novels to read in 2026. Again, if you wanted to see an ebook edition of this, where I can go through my e-reader and point out some novels that I would very much like to read this year from my e-reader, I can do that. I just don't know how exciting these videos are, and I wouldn't want you to force you through that. So, anyways, that'll be it from now. Tell me what you think of some of these novels, if you recommend some of them more than others, and maybe what you are planning to read in 2026. And so I'll leave it there, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, BookTube.